So let me introduce our special guest tonight. First, we have Julia Grindon-Welsh. Julia, since 1993, has been a representative of the Brahma Kumaris to the United Nations in New York. And she's worked actively with the Values Caucus at the UN, and most recently coordinated a program with the UN Commission on the Status of Women that I was on the waiting list to attend, but there were 25,000 people ahead of me and I never got in. So I'm hoping Julia will share some of that with us today. And our other guest, our featured guest, is Natalie Castellanos. Hi, Natalie. Natalie is from Miami. She's in Miami. She is the Director of Policy and Public Affairs at the Health Foundation of South Florida. And I first met Natalie professionally some years ago. I heard her giving a presentation to a bunch of doctors, and she was talking about legal matters. Natalie's also a lawyer. And I was watching her, and I asked her after the program if she was a meditator, because she has that vibe. And I think Natalie is one of the young women showing the way these days. And I'm happy to have her with us tonight as well. So welcome to both of you. Julia, let me start with you, since I recently was not able to get into the commission program. Can you tell us a little bit about your work at the UN and that program in particular?
Yes, certainly. Basically, the Brahma Kumaris as an organization has been affiliated to the UN since the early 80s. And as you said, I came to New York actually at the behest of somebody you mentioned, Dadi Janki, all those years ago. And I found myself in New York and at the UN. And something that was very close to my heart, and also as was mentioned by Maureen, our founder's heart and all of ours, is that this is a women-led organization. And one of the important aspects of the whole organization, and also those who are following, is this empowerment of women. And the other thing was really the recognition of the feminine qualities that are needed to implement a new social structure. And we saw how Brahma Baba had put those young girls, some of them were so cute, those little tiny little dolls at the fore. And since the Brahma Kumaris became affiliated with the UN, this was also one of our objectives, was to empower women. And so we actually participated. They had in the 90s many world conferences on women, one in Nairobi and Beijing, and the Brahma Kumaris participated in that. And then, as you mentioned just now, I think it was from Nairobi, the Commission on the Status of Women was established as a 2-week conference in New York that happens in March. And since 2007, the Brahma Kumaris have participated in that. Well, at least from my experience, they may have participated before, but that's when I started participating. And as you said, it's a world conference where thousands of women from all over the world gather in New York. It's one of my favorite times, even though it's March and it's freezing cold. And some of these poor women come from warm countries, and you can see their shock as they have to huddle up and wrap themselves to keep themselves warm. But you have women from all over the world, thousands of them. Of course, you said that we had 25,000 online, but even when it's held in New York, we have many thousands. I would say something like 3,000 women descend on mid-Manhattan, and it creates a very, very powerful atmosphere. And one of the things that we noticed, at least when I started attending the commission, is that these women, they're so wonderful. The work that they do is so wonderful, and they come together in order to make connections and partnerships, and to find resources to further the good work that they do. And yet often by the end of that 2 weeks, actually many of them feel depleted. They haven't actually managed to be as successful as they had hoped they were going to be when they arrived. And so what we felt as the Brahma Kumaris, something that we could contribute is helping for them to connect more to the inner resources that they had. You heard Maureen talking about those qualities and the virtues that we all have inside. And even though, of course, we all use these resources that we have, these values and the virtues, when we perhaps don't focus on them so much, they kind of remain a little bit hidden. And so one of the things that we wanted to do in the sorts of programs that we do, we write position papers, we do workshops, is to identify these inner resources and do programs and workshops on them to help bring out, strengthen them, really, to help strengthen those resources. And this is one of the ways that we contribute to something called the Sustainable Development Agenda at the UN. This was something that was brought to the fore. All the governments who belong to the UN had come up with this agenda, this universal agenda of agreements of these goals. There's 17 of them. And one of them is about women's empowerment, the empowerment of girls, women and girls. And it's goal 5, if you want to go and have a look at it. So this is one of the ways we contribute. And then just to kind of finish off and bring us up to date, we focused a lot on that, and then we felt recently, with the world being in the fragile state, I would say that it is in many ways. Just got to look at the COVID over the last year or so, but not just COVID. Of course, climate change is really one of the main issues, and I feel is going to become much more to the fore as perhaps we manage to to mitigate some of the virus situation. And that is that, okay, we need to connect and connect to our inner resources inside, but sometimes we need something that is going to, that we can connect to a kind of higher source that brings a new energy into the state of the world, because everything seems to kind of be falling apart. And so we need an energy that is actually going to rebuild, perhaps I would say, hopefully in a new way, with a new system, because the old systems are breaking down. And one of the things that we're focusing on is this term called Shakti leadership. And I don't know if many of you have heard about Shakti and what it means, but Shakti is a feminine form of power. So there's actually the word Shak, it's like a dynamic form of power. The word Shak means actually to be able to do, to act. And in the mythology, the Hindu mythology, you have Shiv, which is the unlimited consciousness, and Shakti, which is the dynamic form of power. So it's the one that makes things happen, it creates and makes things happen in this world. In the Indian mythology, it's actually at the time when the world is in distress and when the children of the Shakti, as it were, needs help, that she comes, because she has that very creative power, but also the power to destroy the evil, destroy the things that are making the system break apart. So we're beginning at the Brahma Kumaris, and I think the world is ready for it. It felt very much when we had our panel discussion just last week online, that this is something really that women are looking for, to be able to connect to this creative energy force of life, the supreme force, in order to empower themselves to be able to bring, it's almost like being a conduit of that power, a conduit of that power of love, which will create a new type of leadership, a leadership that's based on collaboration, that's based on compassion, that's based on trust, that's based on all of these qualities, which are actually like the invisible fabric of life. We tend to focus on external things, but of course it's actually the invisible fabric, spiritual fabric of life that makes things change and grow.
So Natalie, I know you're a longtime mindfulness practitioner, and I'm curious, what's your take on women's empowerment?
So thank you, Kathy, and thank you to the Brahma Kumaris for hosting this conversation and always welcoming me into these spaces. You know, I have never explicitly worked on women's empowerment issues, neither in my work life nor even in my personal life. I don't think of myself necessarily as someone who is committed to women's empowerment, but I do consider myself a feminist. I do try to be thoughtful about these things, and I do think a meditation practice has been key to me sort of developing the tools of ultimately supporting women's empowerment. Obviously, I identify, or not obviously, but I identify as a woman, and have experienced this world as a woman. And so I don't, you know, women's empowerment to me partially has a safety piece, right? You know, and I know a lot of this conversation is just, do women feel safe enough to show up?
A little story about that, you know, and it just struck me this week that back in the day when it wasn't safe, not like it is today, it's still not safe, as you say, but what was the response? You know, it was seen to be a woman's problem. This was a problem, it's a woman's issue. And so what did we do? We started wearing suits with big shoulder pads to work, you know, so we looked bigger, and we looked like men, you know, we dressed with our little ties, and we took self-defense courses. You know, we all lined up at the Y, and we learned how to take a man down if we were attacked, but it was seen as a woman's issue. And fast forward, you know, this is something I'm observing lately. You know, when there's an issue of the George Floyd situation or Breonna Taylor, it's the Black people who are expected to respond to that. It's a Black issue. And so even just this week with the Atlanta shootings, we see the Asian community expected to respond to this and articulate it. And I'm very aware of the fact that these are not women's issues or Black issues or Asian API issues. And unless and until, and this is why I go with the women's empowerment idea, unless and until we value the empowerment of all people, we're not going to solve these issues. And whether I take self-defense classes or wear big, you know, shoulder pads, unless we see it as all of us in all of it, we're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was going to say, I absolutely agree. I think that's such a fantastic point. I mean, I cannot think of women's empowerment without thinking about racial justice. Like, to me, that is such a key, and that is an issue that I do think I gravitate to more. But I think empowerment means it's ubiquitous, it's intersectional, it's me as a white passing Hispanic woman stepping up and stepping into the spaces that I have access to and ensuring that Black women feel safe there, and being intentional and mindful about ways that those spaces may not be welcoming, you know, in subtle ways and maybe not so overt ways. And, you know, and I think, Kathy, your point is such a fair one, that women's empowerment will not happen until men step up and stop supporting a system that makes women feel unsafe, unwelcome. And so empowerment, yeah, there's that basic just like safety survival mechanism, but then there's just that equality piece that we've all been talking about and working toward. And I think as a, you know, I think I'm like, I'm just edging out of younger. I think I'm finally hitting middle age. But you know, it's like my generation in a lot of ways. I grew up with this idea that I was equal to the boys in the classroom, and that the women the girls in my classes growing up were as smart, seen as competitive. And yet we have entered the workforce, and I have had so many experiences in the workforce I have been shown how much progress we still need to make. And I know older generations of women who really had to pioneer in the workforce in the United States. And I cannot speak for globally how things are, but, while there has been progress, I think there is so much left to be done, and we need men to step up and support sort of dismantling that patriarchal structure that has benefited them in the same way. And then, I think, again, there's that racial justice piece. Like, I try to also be really conscious of the ways that a white supremacist system has also benefited me. And, so I think there's a lot of sort of angles to look at this issue.
And this is why, the role of meditation and the role of understanding that, yes, of course, we're talking about it's Women's Month, we're talking about women's empowerment, but actually we're spiritual beings, and the spirit itself is neither gender. It's not male and it's not female. And so when we can practice that or have that awareness and that consciousness of being a spirit, of being a soul in that sense, then that awareness of gender goes away, because as a spirit living in the world, we all are confronted with things that make us frightened, things that make us feel weak, that we don't have confidence over, whether we're a man or a woman, whether we're black or white or whatever race we are, because those things are actually in the spirit itself. And it just, those buttons get pressed when people respond to us because of how we look. And so then, but if we can all, and I know, one of the things that people say, the brotherhood of man, or the brotherhood of humanity in that sense, that we are all one family, but it's very easy to just say something like that. But really, once we have the practice of getting ourselves into that awareness, then we do respond to each other with those qualities you were talking about of love and kindness and acceptance and lifting each other up. So I think that's why this message of the Brahma Kumaris, or this, this practice that we have, or many meditators have, is so important, because I think it's this that's actually going to bring about the change that we need.
Yeah, Julie, I love that point. I love that reminder, because as I was preparing sort of to speak on this panel today with you all, I was thinking about the ways that meditation has helped in so far as it helps cultivate a sense of mindfulness and presence, and sort of create that space between, that space to respond to the stimuli in our environment. But that's such a good reminder of, it's also a reminder to ourselves when we're in the practice of the fact that we are these spiritual beings, and that we can cultivate kindness and loving compassion. And that it's interesting, because I have found that my meditation practice has really helped me, I think, be a better feminist and be better about supporting women, because I can sort of self-monitor and have the confidence in myself to pause and think, if I'm scrolling on social media and see a picture of a beautiful woman doing something fantastic, if I feel a sense of envy, right? Like, I can identify that and say, it's okay. I don't have to cling to that sense or feel ashamed of that. In the workplace, I think there's a tendency to see strong women as, oh, am I allowed to use curse words, or, the B word, like, oh, that woman is like a B word, or, she's so dominating, and kind of push against some of the stereotypes that I myself have had ironed into myself about women and the way that we're supposed to act, and the sort of judgment that passes off. And I really do credit that with meditation, that
it's really, I think, having time, one thing is meditation, but even time for reflection is so important. One of the things that I found very much when we're live, as it were, at the UN, and we're having the Commission on the Status of Women, and we're holding these workshops, and these women have been busy, and it's very stressful, actually, 2 weeks of constant interaction and that sort of thing. And they come into our spaces, and you can, first of all, they don't quite know what's going on usually. But once they've settled in and they start, and they're able to start to just focus not on the work of what they've got to do, but on themselves, how they're feeling, what quality, and even if they're feeling frazzled and tired, and that's maybe how they're feeling when they sit down, but by perhaps having questions of reflection or discussion in a safe space with women, they're able to actually acknowledge and recognize the strengths that they have once they start reflecting on it. And to begin with, they might be reflecting in a small group, and so they're able to share, and this is one thing that women are very good on, actually. And so they're able to support each other, and then they build from what each other are saying. So having come in frazzled, you can almost feel the power in the room as they start to emerge those things, first of all through words, because as they're speaking to each other, but then we'll usually do some sort of meditation or reflective practice, and even if it's just writing something down, asking them asking themselves, or really acknowledging what they already have. So even though they may not feel loving when they enter the room, even though they may not feel empowered when they enter the room, by just taking time and perhaps writing or deeply reflecting on it, they realize, I do have this quality. And as they focus on it, then that inner resource blossoms, as it were, and then they'll recognize, and even if they have friends, and other friends will say, well, I recognize this about you. And then then what's happening is they're exchanging these beautiful qualities that they found in themselves and amongst each other. And it's almost like a garden grows. I mean, I know I'm sounding very poetic, but it really does feel like that, actually. And sometimes we get comments like, this is the best meeting. I really needed this. It's the best meeting I've been in all day, because otherwise they're thinking with their heads, they're thinking about the resources that they need, the practical things, how they're going to, or they're listening to a lot of very disheartening, even though we have made strides in terms of women's empowerment, there's still, as we all know, a lot that goes on, and it can be extremely discouraging. So we try to create these spaces that really uplift. And I think this reflection on our inner resources, which everyone has inside, they're innate to the soul, actually, they're innate to the spirit, but we just need to spend a bit of time reflecting on them, because that naturally helps bring them up. And you're talking about a shift, and we're hoping for a huge shift, right, in society. That's what we want. But even taking those little shifts, as you say, you become silent, you become present, and your whole awareness can shift. And suddenly there's clarity, there's a way forward where perhaps there wasn't a way before, or you're in a work discussion and you're not able to find the answer, and our arguments are beginning to rise up, and you just take that moment, and there's a real shift that happens, not just with you, the one who's taking that moment, but you can feel it in the room, right, Natalie? Doesn't that happen with you?
Yeah, I think meditation is so useful because it's instructive, right? When we practice meditation, we are taught to approach ourselves and the moment non-judgmentally, with curiosity, with an open mind, sort of what arises, and not hold on to it. And I think when we then start applying that externally to women's empowerment, and again, we have to think of it intersectionally with the racial justice lens and the nationality, able body, right? There's so many elements to making sure that people are fully empowered to thrive in society. And, I think one of the challenges of the moment is that there's so much connection through social media and so much elevation of the sort of our consciousness and sense of how much suffering women have gone through. Women now have this worldwide network, and we hashtag, and we all know the story of what happened in London 2 weeks ago with the woman that Sarah Evergard, right? I know her name, and I live in Miami, Florida. You know, I think when we are confronting these very physical threats to safety, and I think for the Black community, it's hundreds of years in this country and around the world of oppression. You know, it's very hard to stay grounded and centered and meditative when confronting oppression. But meditation is just so instructive. And I know I'm using charged word, right? Like white supremacy is charged and racism is charged. And I think as meditators, it's sort of, we have a responsibility to try our best to approach these very charged and emotional encounters with that same sense of non-judgment, curiosity, open-mindedness. And there's a shame, I think, that the person, right, the oppressor must feel. Like there is no way that a person who oppresses others does not have some amount of oppression within themselves. And I think that's something that meditation at least has taught me. And so as a meditator too, thinking about when I say to someone, oh, that's racist, right? Is that the way to say it? Because evoking shame that's not a non-judgmental space. That's not the kind of space I think that is going to come out sort of productive. And so I do think we're just at such an interesting moment externally where all of these internal practices can really guide us in these interpersonal exchanges, and then hopefully bring us to better systems. You know, I think that's the BKs are just like such an important system, right, and structure in this world to help kind of cultivate that safe space where people could talk and not feel that sense of shame, and sort of bring this practice to life.
I'd like to ask both of you, as we can continue to explore this empowerment, and it's not just women's empowerment. I think it's this question of empowerment in general for anybody that feels unsafe or feels marginalized or feels to be the other or less valued or less regarded. We all need to have that empowerment. So I'd like to ask you, what gets in the way of it other than our, conditioning and societal messages? And what do you think gets in the way? And what is the antidote for that? Or what can we do about it?
But something that immediately comes to mind is I think our fears get in the way. Because we're kind of allowing ourselves to be defined by these external factors rather than the internal strengths and qualities that we have, which are innate to us. And I think another thing that we do is we dwell in the darkness of the world rather than filling ourselves with light and leading from there. It's very easy for us to at least this is what happens to me. If I stay too much in the darkness of what's going on in the world, whether it's listening to news or listening to my friends or whatever it is, or at the UN sometimes listening to all the dark deeds that are happening in the world, it really can really deplete my energy. It's almost so I feel helpless. And so at that time, then what I have to do is usually I'll take a walk or something just to get some fresh air and take me away physically from that feeling of darkness and that feeling of disempowerment. But then I will, start to reflect on the qualities that I have inside, and not just the qualities that I have inside, but this Shakti power that is available to me by connecting to the higher source, the source of all love, the source of all happiness. And so that how can I bring that now into myself and bring that into the world so that I respond to the world in a way which brings benefit, that I can bring light rather than, sit in the darkness with everybody.
Yeah.
I think, Julia, I think fear is such a universal driver and motivator. And, I think when we sort of start parsing through a lot of our reactions and a lot of what we see in the world, it almost always can just trace back to fear, all of those negative pieces. I think I might, so thinking sort of externally and structurally, I think one of the big barriers, which probably, you know, when we trace it back to a central like core motivator, could be fear, but it's sort of like an overwhelm. One is priorities. There's so many issues, and we've already named a number of them, that it's hard to sort of lift up a few for prioritization. And then I think there's this other aspect too, is that in order to empower, somebody with power has to be willing to let that power go. And there are a lot of people who have benefited from our current structures and systems, namely white, male, identifying, wealthy individuals. And so the question is, for those who benefit from that structure, are they willing to let that power go so that we can have a more egalitarian and equal society like we have envisioned?
And I think one of the things that stops them from wanting to let go is fear, because they're used to that power, and they don't want, they think if they share it, then they will lose some of their power. But actually, if they share it, they're also empowering themselves. But I think fear is a real driver, and it also, it makes us understand at least the perpetrators of violence as well, because often they are acting because of fear they have either faced in their life or the fears that they are facing now.
Yeah, absolutely. I used to work with some attorneys that ran essentially like an innocence project, where they would identify individuals who were on death row that had improper sort of procedural aspects of their cases. And so they would go back. I mean, these are individuals who have been convicted of usually murder. And then they would go back and try to trace aspects of the case to try to get people off of death row, right? There was they felt this moral imperative that we shouldn't have people on death row, coupled with the fact that it's expensive and there's sort of more practical kind of aspects to it too. And I remember one of the attorneys who worked in that project was also a social worker, and she shared with me, in addition to the fact that there's just awful racial disparities in the way that sentencing occurs, she also shared with me, she had never met a person convicted of murder, like convincingly convicted of murder, who did not have serious mitigating circumstances. That is abuse, neglect, what any of you who work in sort of social work or behavioral health spaces, they call them ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And I felt that was such an important thing to remember, that a lot of times the people who are oppressing and are committing violence against women or just other people have come from violence themselves. It is not a spontaneous act. It is a learned generational issue.
True. Julia, you mentioned we have to be able to take in that power from a source, because we're empty sometimes with all the stuff that's coming at us. To what extent do you feel that we have to really work on self-respect? That underlying this capacity to take in, whether take in the source of energy, or whether just to find a place to accommodate all these messages and all that's going on in the world, that we have to have some fundamental understanding and self-respect for ourselves. And I think women get lost in that, in the doing for others.
Mm-hmm. I think hugely is the answer to that. Hugely. This is why even when, again, I'm just going to reflect back to this, but it kind of comes up for me when you ask that question. When I'm thinking of the women who would be sitting in circles in this commission, and when they sit down and they start to reflect on those inequalities that they have. And you can see here, even in the sound that's coming from their voices, that internal self-respect start to grow. Because I do think that it's very easy for us to qualify ourselves by what we can or can't do on the outside. Even if we're professional, even if we have, you know, all these qualifications and we're making our way in the world, we're constantly met with challenges of not being able to meet those, or not feeling good enough to meet them, for many reasons. We're trying to juggle so many things in our life, and it's all about doing and accomplishing and ticking off the list, you know. And if we don't do that, then we feel you know, not worthless, but not perhaps as worthy as we should. And so this is why I think this reflection on actually those qualities that we have inside, and that naturally we have them, builds our self-respect if we focus on them, if we give them space,
we allow it
to grow. And also I think that once we do start to reflect on it and allow it to grow, we start seeing it, as Natalie was saying, in others. You start to, you know, you start to understand where other people are coming from. You give them space to be themselves. You become so much more than you were. And so then again, your self-respect starts to grow as you kind of feel that inner safety and that inner stability of knowing yourself. And you're starting to, and I think the other thing is you're starting to experience your strengths. And that experience actually gives you that self-respect, because experience, it can't be given to you from outside or anywhere else. It's something that is true to you. And again, that gives you that kind of self-respect.
Natalie, any thoughts on that?
I kind of sort of have two thoughts come to mind. And I loved, listening to Julia's thoughts on how self-respect is something that we can grow and develop. It's not a fixed attribute. It's like that growth mindset idea that we can all constantly be developing that. It's not sort of dependent in one single factor that will not change. You know, I do think maybe I have always thought of self-respect in a sense. I feel I just have been lucky in this life that I was born to a mother who sort of loved me, you know, and this is that feminine power that she had, but just loved me and instilled this confidence in me, that I sort of entered the external world with a sense of self-respect and sort of baseline confidence that I know not everybody gets. You know, that is just pure luck that I was born to this person that did that for me. And points in my life where I have had to sort of think about my identity, who am I, right? And sort of return back to my core essence of everything Julia has said. It resonates so much with me, you know, because I have had those experiences where I cling to certain identities and then I have to return back, you know, and so there is a practice in developing a sense of self-worth and self-respect and just returning back to that I am love and I am this soul that is just love. And so I recognize that I just had good fortune to start from a good place, but two, that I have had the tools. And again, meditation, I think, has been such an important part of that practice, but to return back to, you know, I can think of lots of time when I was studying law, for example. I did not do well as a law student. I was not a successful first-year law student. I was very mediocre. And, you know, this is coming out of a pretty successful undergraduate and pretty successful sort of grades. And I had a family member in prison, and I had a family member going through drug addiction, and sort of seeing that, right? I had always thought of myself as having a certain identity. This is my family. This is who I am. And then having that taken away was a challenge for me. And so being able to return to that essence has always been, I think, crucial to maintaining a sense of self-respect and self-worth. And so I don't know if that's helpful. I know that's very personal, but you know, it's something that came to mind.
And how really, you know, if we feel fragile, again, we can give ourselves that love that same love that your mother gave you, to give that love to ourselves will help build our self-respect. And of course, if we use that same love, you know, just unconditional love to everyone, it will also help to rise them up. Love is so important. It's such a unifying force, isn't it? It's such a powerful force. And I think, you know, just when you were talking about all of those people who have been incarcerated and things have happened to them to make them into who they are. And I think so much of it was just a complete lack of love. They never felt that love. So they had such low self-esteem. And so therefore they had to kind of prove to themselves in other ways, in ways of acting out to make them feel that they exist almost.
I know that Natalie was talking about restorative justice, but I was thinking that in relation to self-respect, that this is what meditation does, in a sense, is about a restorative narrative.
Yeah.
That you're telling yourself a different story, that you're reaffirming the inherent good and the inherent worth that then manifests in terms of a different story. And I like the point also of, you know, because we know what happened, as you mentioned, in England a couple of weeks ago, and all over the world, there's countless cases. But I'm also the world, you know, and you really drew my attention to that idea of when I'm in the company of others, do they feel safe? You know, so it's not just about, you know, physical violence that one needs to be protected from, but do I make others who are, Ken Burns, I saw a line I thought was very, very nice, just one liner, and then you can fill in the rest of it yourself. There is no them. There is no them. And that's sometimes where the problem arises. Mm-hmm. And what it comes back to the degree that I'm lacking in self-respect, then I have to find someone that I feel better than, you know. And so there's this whole game of superiority and inferiority. And it happens at a personal level. It happens from group to group, country to country, religion to religion. And so when I can, as Julia was saying, this idea of that we're all connected in a sense, and that your qualities and my qualities are the same, and that's what you want for yourself, then how can we bring that about? And also when Natalie was talking about meditation, the pause, if you like, that in doing that, there's just an inherent generosity. You know, there's an inherent generosity, a willingness to maybe look at something in a different way, to see something that I've maybe missed, and then to be able to change what could have been a negative and put something, you know, life-giving into the mix. And so I see that as generosity. So many things. I just, and the thing of, you know, woman, as you say, for us, it comes back to, it's like all souls. It's not just male or female, but for women in particular, that they have permission, that no one needs to give it to them, that they have permission to focus on themselves, right. To take that time out, to remove the hats of all the responsibilities and all the expectations that everyone has from them in the roles that they play as a woman, and to explore who they are without or in spite of or whatever. And then that, again, seeing that whole thing of like the male, female, and we always think of the, you know, the male is external and the female is internal. And so that exploration at that level, but then to bring it into manifestation, that you externalize it. So I am, one of the images that the BKs use would show this idea of the fullness of the male and the female. So I'm not looking for a partner, but within my own self to reconcile or bring together these two things. And whether you see it as in the, you know, classic terms of head and heart, or however you want to say it, external, internal, but that I have to be all those things within my own self. And I do think too, definitely there's no sense here ever of being anti-men or anything like that. But I think our brothers at a subtle level are saying, girls, go ahead, we need your help, you know. And so that automatically, by you doing it for and with yourself, you're helping everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted, finally, it's not enough to just explore it or to understand it or to think, we have to feel it. We have to be embodied, in embodied souls. And in this, I heard a great definition of enlightenment this week. And somebody said, oh, it's a very enlightened soul. And they meant that your light shines, you are enlightened, you know. And when you are that way, just in your daily routine, whatever it is, going here, going there, when you are that way, it can't help but be seen.
Meditation is still a struggle for me. It is not always, right, this perfect Zen, you know, and I think anyone who meditates can, you know, relate to that, it's the power of meditation to me is constantly returning to it and not letting it go, because I think it can be uncomfortable at times to just sit with myself and confront myself. And so to me, that is the power of meditation, is the, you know, and meditation is a constant returning. It's a wandering and then saying, oh, I'm supposed to be focusing on my breath, or a mantra or whatever, right, we're meditating on. So to me, the power is just that forgiveness and generosity. I love, Veronica, that you pointed out, the generosity to myself to return back.
Yeah.
The experience of meditation, I mean, there are so many different experiences, but I would say that when, you know, as Natalie was saying, it's not that always you have perfect meditation, because it depends on how quiet you're able to make your mind and your heart so that you hear yourself, your real self. And for that, you need real quietness. We talk about soul consciousness, and so that you're literally, you know, letting go of everything, you know, the feeling of the consciousness of your body, and you almost get lost in I would say, like, lost in light, but the light that it allows that connection with the self and connection with God. It's totally silent and yet living. It's got such energy to it. So it's very creative, and it almost feels as if an idea or a thought is coming from nothing that you've been thinking about. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm just trying to explain a kind of a feeling that you are asking about.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. I remember being in Oxford a few years ago, and I sort of by happenstance found myself able to attend a silence retreat. And Waddy, you'll remember I mentioned this. It was not anything I planned, but I was so glad I was able to take advantage of it.
Yeah.
And I went away thinking, sort of back to where I started, which was that my soul was safe here.
That's beautiful.
And it was in that experience that I was able to get in touch with all those things I didn't ever want to look at or see, but they all knock on the doors, you know, and we tend to shut it down pretty quickly. And I think these times of COVID have brought us on a collision course between the external events and what's inside of us that's trying to get out. And so to create a situation in meditation where our souls are safe to experience whatever it is. And as Natalie says, to keep going back to that place of purity, that place of innocence, that place that wants to come out, and to become I'm just using it euphemistically, enlightened, meaning that the light shines out. The light really shines out. So that's my experience of using the power of meditation. And then after that, the light just shines.
You've all done such a good job at what you're saying. That's all anybody wants, is to let their light shine, is whoever they are, whatever it is, to allow that to express itself. That's what we're here for, to express ourselves. And so the light, of course, connected with the inherent goodness of the living being. And okay, I could go on, but two of the things for me, one is about the self-exploration. I never cease to be fascinated with my own self. so this takes me places, reveals, as Kathy's saying, the nasty things as well as the good things, and at the right time. And then the other thing, it gives me access to an energy. There's an energy that becomes available, and it's not even at that moment. That's one thing, but things start happening. There's another kind of energy that becomes available to you on the outside. It transcends, as you were saying, Julia, those dark things.
We're probably not used to thinking of ourselves in extraordinary terms, but through Bebe Butler's commentary and Lucinda Drayton's music, they both have given us great messages of optimism and hope and the experience of all that we can be. So any final thoughts, Julia or Natalie, Waddy?
One just quick, I wanted to just take a moment to honor you, Kathy. I know tonight's theme is women leading the way, and I think, Kathy, over the years, you took an interest in me as a woman and have nurtured and mentored me in a lot of ways, and just creating this space. And I really thank the Brahma Kumaris as well as an organization for centering women. And Julia, everything that you do, I've really enjoyed hearing from you and learned a lot from you. So I just wanted to honor all the women here that are leading the way, and those of you in the audience as well. Thank you. So appreciate you.
Yes,
Thank
you.
Yeah.
Natalie, the world is in good hands with you. So. I also want to thank you. You're always willing, and you've participated with us many, many times. And Natalie doesn't remember saying this, but she said she wanted to break the rules without breaking windows. So this is the modern day activism. And as I say, we're in good hands with you. And Julia, the world is in your hands now at the UN. So. And of course, none of us would be here without Waddy, and of course the women who placed her here, and Julia at the UN, and whose way have shown us all the way. We're all in their line. So thank you to all of you on Zoom, and all of you who've joined us on Facebook Live. Continue to follow us. If you're not on our mailing list, please subscribe so you'll get a regular email weekly, and then you'll know about all our programs. And so we're very, very happy to have had you. Julia, did you want to say?
I just, earlier, I don't know if we've got just a moment, but earlier, when you'd sent the questions and you had mentioned about Dadi Janki and Dadi Gulzar having just left recently, I found two quotes from both of them. And I just thought, if it's appropriate, if we have a moment, I can just read those quotes from these very wise, empowered women. Okay. So the first one is from Dadi Janki. And she said, "In today's world, true success will require constant courage and complete honesty on our part. If you ever do feel afraid or discouraged, here is a secret I will share with you. Take just one moment of silence. Go within yourself and evoke your courage. Have the faith that you do have a solution. You do have answers. You do know what must be done. Just turn inwards, emerge the wisdom that is within, and do something with it. That's our Dadi Janki. And then Dadi Gulzar, again, a beautiful, powerful woman, sister, completely different. And this is something from her. If we are to be instruments for this new creation, the space within our mind must be sparkling and fresh, with no trace of the dark world we come from. God is the seed of the new creation, the source of everything that will emerge in the new world. Maintain attention on God, because only when we are clear and absorbed in Him can the new world emerge through us.
Wow.
Om Shanti.
Just take a moment to absorb that. So thank you all very, very much for being here. Those of you on Facebook, and I know we were live streaming on the UN site as well, the BKUN site. So I hope that we'll have a chance to come together again and talk about courage, Julia.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you all very much. Have a wonderful week ahead.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Waddy, Waddy, and
Thanks, Julia.